This week, Paul and I interviewed James Wickett from Signal Sciences. In the news, shadowy hackers revealed two zero-day vulnerabilities by accident, how Alphabet plans to keep hackers away from this year's elections, and security as a product. Stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/ASW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter. IT Pro TV, binge-worthy learning for IT teams. Why is it binge-worthy? It's learning presented in an engaging and entertaining talk show format that beats voice-over PowerPoint snooze fests. Watch over 3,300 hours of content in their on-demand library, on your desktop, on the go, or in the comfort of your own living room. IT Pro TV is IT training you and your team actually want to watch, which means a better return on your learning investment. Get started with IT Pro TV for Teams by visiting itpro.tv/Security Weekly and start a 7-day free trial and get 30% off standard or premium IT Pro TV memberships using the code SECWeekly30.
Welcome everyone to episode 17, our 18th episode of Application Security Weekly. I am, of course, your host, Keith Hoodlet, and I am excited to be joined by my illustrious co-host, Paul Asadorian.
Hey, thanks, Keith. Nice to be here as always for Application Security Weekly.
Very glad to have you as always, Paul. So a couple of quick announcements here before we jump into our interview with James. First, go to itpro.tv/Security Weekly and use the code SECWeekly30 to try a free 7-day trial and receive 30% off of your monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. Also, we have an upcoming webcast with Javelin Networks on overcoming the limitations of privileged account management being held on May 24th from noon to 1 p.m. So do not forget to catch that. It's going to be a lot of fun. And with that, very happy to have with us here today, James Wickett from Signal Sciences. James, of course, is meeting the intersection of DevOps and security communities, founded the open source project Gauntlet to serve as a rugged testing framework for DevOps. And of course, in this case, has a DevOps core and security testing course available at lynda.com. A couple of other interesting things about James here that I was picking out from our wiki here is, first, James is the creator of the Lonestar Application Security Conference, which is the largest annual security conference in Austin, Texas, and has also run the DevOps Days Austin conference as well, as on the Global DevOps Days board. Very cool. The last thing I wanted to mention is in his free time, he is perfecting barbecue brisket, which is something that I'm eager to try the next time I'm down in Austin.
Yummy.
James, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, you're welcome to come on down, and we'll have some brisket for you.
Excellent. So, James, before we jump in, first, you're the head of research at Signal Sciences. How long have you been at Signal Sciences for?
I've been at Signal Sciences for 4 years. We started right when the company started, so I was the one of the first employees at the company.
That's
James,
awesome.
you look kind of young for founding one of the first firewall companies in Gauntlet. Oh wait, that's a different Gauntlet.
Oh yeah, different Gauntlet.
Different.
Yeah, well, our Gauntlet has no E.
Okay.
Yeah, we had to do that. So
awesome.
Paul is remembering the days he had hair and he was using.
Pretty much. Pretty much.
So, James, a few weeks ago at this point, maybe about a month ago now, you gave a talk at RSA about injecting security into continuous integration and continuous development. And of course, Paul and I are exceedingly interested in the whole conversation about DevOps versus DevSecOps.
Yeah, isn't that DevSecOps? That's DevSecOps, right? That's like a thing, right, Keith?
As much as some people would like to believe, I'm on a crusade to, take the sec out of DevSecOps, as it were, and put it back to DevOps. But James, I know you're a listener of the show because we talked earlier about it. What are your thoughts on the DevOps versus DevSecOps conversation?
Well, I'm of two minds on this topic, actually. I'm a purist like yourself, Keith. I think that DevOps really, we don't need to add kind of more into it because, where do you stop, right? It's Dev, Sec, QA, Ops. Like where do we go from there? What about finance when they get involved, or, what do you do with all these kind of ways we keep piling into the definition here? But I have seen people take the DevOps initiative inside of security groups and try to like help that launch like what's traditionally old school type security and try to like recouch it in kind of the new DevOps, faster moving, agile pace of delivering software. And they do it to a lot of success, and they do it under that DevSecOps banner. So I have some compassion or empathy for people that want to use that. I also realize, it is just a name, but I do kind of side more on the, it's just DevOps. Like we're continuing to grow this across a lot of different silos, and we're bringing all these things together. So you have development at the far left and operations at the far right, and we're just sort of saying like DevOps is the encompassment of all the process of delivering software across that. So I'm kind of more on your side, but I do understand why people will use the DevSecOps banner.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we're going to have Pete Chestnut on here at some point in the future to talk about his blog series as well, the whole term of DevSecOps. So I imagine we'll have a really good conversation about it at some point because you're right. It is a term that if people find success in using it and it gets security involved in the DevOps process at their organization, then by all means, go right ahead. I'm still of the mind that you're not doing DevOps unless you're including security as part of the process from the get-go. But again, as we mentioned, earlier when we were talking, James, a lot of companies still aren't even doing DevOps quite yet. I mean, everybody in Silicon Valley seems to be doing it, but I think that that's kind of the loud minority. And to that end, the IBMs, the Oracles, the large company X of the world, perhaps isn't even there yet. So I don't know. I feel like throwing the security moniker into DevOps is just going to get more confusing for them, and I'd rather just get them to doing DevOps first so that security can be an easy implementation. But speaking of implementing security into DevOps, tell us a little bit about your talk that you gave out at RSA.
Well, can I throw one more thing on that? I
Please,
think
that
for DevOps, like when DevOps first started, it was started in 2009. We were like, okay, DevOps is culture, DevOps is culture, DevOps is culture. But around 2012, you started to see a lot of job openings for like the DevOps engineer, and that became the thing to hire for. At that time, a lot of people were giving talks like, there's no such thing as a DevOps engineer. DevOps is a cultural movement. DevOps is, that's when John Willis and Damon Edwards kind of came up with the CAMS model for DevOps at the same time. But people needed a banner to call like, okay, you're a DevOps engineer, or maybe now like you're a DevSecOps engineer or whatever. People needed that as a way to say like, we're not trying to hire, old school sysadmin, right? What we really mean is we mean what we now call SRE, or like an operations engineer who's ready to do DevOps type things. But at the time, we didn't have the language to kind of support any of that. So we just sort of said, okay, we're going to call it the DevOps engineer. So maybe there's some of that mixed in here too. Like we want security people who are ready to automate things, who are able to culturally, work with both development and operations, and kind of not put a bunch of blocks and gates in places, but help be an enabler of the business, help enable people to go faster. Security as a kind of built-in thing. Jason Chan talks about this at Netflix, of kind of creating the paved road for people. So when you say like we want to hire engineers for that capacity, maybe we do need to use words like DevSecOps or something like that to clarify like we're not looking for doing things in the old way, but like we're helping people understand kind of the new way. But I still, hopefully we can still call it DevOps. But does that kind of help on some of that? That's sort of some of the background on that.
I think you're right in the sense that if we get more security people that can work in a development shop, for lack of a better term, right? Whether that's a team or an organization. For a long time, I think that Paul and I have been talking about the idea of eventually security people will need to be good at development, right? They'll need to have some understanding of things like patterns and anti-patterns, the ways in which some of the software is being used internally or being written internally, and then being able to augment those teams into a self-service model, right? So providing them with the paved road of, here's a good set of libraries that we have tested or written ourselves and bundled in with some open source software to make this process easy for the development team, so they don't have to worry about, which lane should they be driving in. That road is already built for them, and to that end, now they can actually go and drive the car. So
Yeah.
I could definitely see that whole idea being, coalescing around the term DevSecOps.
Well, in operations, they had to learn how to do development as well, right? And that was one of the big, I think developers sort of came along and circa 2010, they're like, yeah, you got to use version control, and like your infrastructure should be treated as code. And operations folks were thinking, oh, this is brand new information to us. We're used to keeping our inherent knowledge in like wikis, and we're not developers, we're sysadmins or whatever. And I see the sentiment sometimes on Twitter where like security people say, oh, you can be really good at security and not good at coding. Well, I just don't think that's going to be true for the future. You don't have to be an expert developer. It's not like you need to build the entire, don't need to build the entire stack yourself, but to be able to automate the pieces that we care about and be able to work within the environments that we find ourselves in. I mean, I highly recommend if you're in security, like picking up doing development, like it's a really critical thing for you right now.
But I think, James, you got a great point. And I thought of it in the beginning as developers were becoming sysadmins in DevOps. But what you're saying is like just the opposite, right? Sysadmins need to become more like developers, which is completely different. And what really painted the picture for me is, I forget if it was, I think it was Beyond the Phoenix Project. But in reading those books, one of the sticking points that I really identified with was, you're a developer, you need resources from IT, and you had to submit your request. And in the beginning, that was like someone like me and hundreds of thousands of other people whose job it was as sysadmin. And one of the jobs you had was to take the server out of the box and put it in a rack and then give developers access to it. And then slowly, and then rather quickly, that became, I have to provision VMs. And I need a ticket from the developers. I have to provision the VM. That may also mean that I have to go get some more hardware, as in the Phoenix project, right, to support more of those VMs, and that request could take a really long time. And I think when containers started becoming popular, like, wow, that just like eliminated the need for all of those requests. And if operations development comes together, to me, that was one of the huge problems that it solved just from an operations perspective.
Yeah, we saw a lot of sysadmins sort of reinvent their career into this. Okay, I got to learn development tactics to be able to take part in kind of this new ecosystem. And kids these days, right? They're using the cloud, and it's like, oh, you can provision servers in seconds, right? And I've been working at companies doing that for a lot of years now, but it is an interesting problem to think about how when we went from hardware to virtual machines, like it still took me, whenever I worked at a large enterprise a decade ago, it's like it would take 6 weeks to get a piece of hardware, racked and jacked and ready to go, and it would take 6 weeks to get a VM. And why is that? It's because we built all this process and we built all of our thinking around that. But when you make the switch to the cloud, it's like, oh yeah, it takes 3 minutes or whatever to get a server.
Yeah, and I
serverless, right?
For whatever reason, omitted the cloud from that too. But that certainly can increase in speed, but also, you have that cost problem in the cloud where it could still be gated largely. Sure, programmatically you can go spin stuff up, but there's a cost. And I think many organizations, and still today, they get that first huge bill and they're like, oh my God, why do I have a $20,000 bill from Amazon? Well, there's a reason for that.
Yeah. And Paul, I think that it's interesting though when you talk about the idea of the cloud, because it's almost like you see the cost as a dollar value on a piece of paper and you think that it's a lot of money, but then you don't look at, okay, how much time is it costing me and how many personnel to allocate to this is it actually costing me? Because you see those salaries over the course of a year, but if you actually looked at the amount of time spent by personnel and how many personnel on doing this in your organization today to manage and maintain it, you realize that alone, not even including the cost of the hardware, tends to end up being more expensive because the human resource, especially in the security space, is finite. In fact, we say we have a hiring problem or we have a personnel problem in terms of trying to find all of the talent. I have some thoughts on that maybe we can talk about on a different segment. Maybe we can even have James back to talk about that. But I think that's ultimately what it comes down to is the cloud. They're going to be better at keeping it up and running and perhaps even more secure, as we talked about last week as well with Adam Gordon on securing your cloud environment or some of the defaults that are available to you. So I'm really curious though, because I know that we've kind of taken a tangent here. James, what are your thoughts on how security can get involved in the DevOps or the continuous integration, continuous development process? Seeing as how you've spoken about it here at some conferences recently.
Yeah. I take the continuous delivery and think of it as a pipeline, and I break it up into 5 phases, and hopefully I'll remember them here. It's like development. Then I like to think of the inheritance step, which is where you kind of bundle in all the libraries and all the system pieces. Then your build step, your deployment step, and your operation step. And I think along each of those five pieces of the process, you can add tooling that's like fit for that stage. And so in that talk, I kind of break down some of those tools and walk through some of them. You mentioned Gauntlet earlier. Gauntlet kind of fits nicely in that build step. I work over at you mentioned earlier, I work at Signal Sciences, and so we kind of spend more time in the operation step. You can think of like vendors like Black Duck or Sonatype or folks like that, kind of over in the development / maybe in the inherent step. So whatever you're bundling into your app, whatever you're kind of putting all together there.
So it's almost like you've taken the idea of, let's build some modules from a security standpoint that we can inject into different stages of the development process, and then given exact examples to which things you could or should include as part of that. Were there any maybe sections of that talk where you highlight perhaps more strongly where security can have the biggest impact?
I think that we often take security as an all or nothing type approach, and we try to. I think one of the great things about security people is they're detail oriented and very specific about all that stuff. But taking an approach of how do I look across all this stuff and where can I instrument things to go faster, still get the tests that need to happen. They're maybe not done as thorough as I want, but instead of doing for example, like an annual type scan, right? It's like I scan the code base to some lower level of effectiveness, but on a every commit type level, and I inject that into my build system, or help instrument areas of my production application to figure out where attackers are actually going, what they're going after, the type of stuff that they're looking at. One of the most common things of all security problems is like we don't even know what we have installed. I think being able to just publish like a software bill of materials of all the stuff that I'm using, the libraries, dependencies, and OSs, and everything like that, and just getting an understanding of where we're at is a helpful thing as well. So I'd say try to focus in on a couple areas. Don't try to get it all done at once. We can't do that, but find meaningful ways to add automation inside of your build or your entire CI/CD pipeline.
Gotcha. Paul, I do have a few more questions, but are there any that you want to jump in on?
No, not specifically.
Okay, that's fine. So I wanted to get your thoughts as well, James, on what about putting security at kind of the choke points, right? So I know that prior to the show, we talked a little bit about companies that are trying to put it out on like their content delivery network, or kind of like that last mile security implementation. So they're trying to push it as much into the user space as possible and away from the application. What are your thoughts around that? Because I know that a lot of companies like Cloudflare and Akamai and others are touting a lot of their security abilities at the content delivery side of things, and a lot of companies seem to be jumping on that as maybe a silver bullet. But I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on it, and is it a silver bullet for companies today?
I think they're hoping that it would solve some of the problems that are kind of inherent in the system. If you walk through like where did like the technology like web application firewalls, where did that come from, how we got it, we see that it has some questionable origins, and like it's questionable like if it actually works. It can slow things down and break things, and cause application traffic to fail sometimes. But we had this thing called PCI and other compliance regimes that sort of came out and said, okay, you got to use a web application firewall. And so I can't remember of 04, 05 or whenever people were like, web application firewalls suck, but we still got to use them. And then when you kind of look to your left and your right, you're like, oh, I got a CDN sitting over here. Maybe I can just add some regex rules up there and sort of call that a web application firewall, and we could be good here. And I recently wrote a post on this, and I kind of gave it the kind of weird title of "Oops, I waffed my cache," but we have this idea that we can add this application security layer at the furthest point away from our actual application. And to me, that's kind of a weird thing that we, as an industry, arrived at this as like a good practice or something that we thought was like a desirable thing.
So is there any, anything that you see, especially on the signal sciences side, from companies that are doing this, but, still doing it badly? Is it marginally helpful? Is it, that 20% that gets you 80% coverage? Is it, that 20% of work that gets you less than 20% coverage?
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it, right? You have to write the regex has to be written in a way that's so loose that allows most stuff to get through, which is fine. I mean, you get some level of protection there from some like low level bots and scrapers type stuff. But as far as signal sciences is, we'll go into companies and they'll say, yeah, because we kind of compete as like we brand ourselves as a next gen web application firewall doing security at this space. And we say, well, just put us behind your Kona or whatever, and we'll see if we can detect anything. Because if that level of protection is good, then like we won't see anything, and you'll be fine, and like you'll know it, we'll know it, and then we can just go move on to do something else. But in our case, like we see lots of attacks still come through successfully, and rightly so, right? Because you just can't put the kind of prevention in place at your cache tier that you could whenever you're sitting right next to your application, where you have awareness of like what valid logins are and like application abuse and misuse are, transactions, when paired with all the like the OWASP top 10, like cross-site scripting and SQL injection and all that command execution. So our approach sort of puts all that stuff together and is able to do some analysis and understand, how successful people are on your application, where things are getting attacked. And help give feedback loops to the developers as people are, as your app is running in production. And those are just feedback loops that you just can't build properly with kind of a CDN type approach.
James, along those lines, the way I understand the Signal Sciences product is it's a different approach in that there's a feedback loop for developers, for operations, and security. Is that true? And if so, like what is the best pieces of information that those three different groups are getting from your product?
Yeah, we detect. So we detect all that is true. Of course, it's true, and more.
And
many
more.
People would,
right?
Yeah, everybody would get feedback out of this. Developers often will implement a check so that you can isolate parts of your application. Specifically, if you're a dev group that works on a certain part of the application. Any attacks that go to that can go to certain Slack channels or can do certain alerting where they can understand what's going on at the application at any given time. For operations, we also look at all the anomalous type behavior that's going on as well, and we think of that as anywhere from like HTTP error codes, source networks, spoofed things in the request. We also instrument. I kind of touched on this earlier, but we look for application abuse and misuse, and this is where like there's some more interesting data that can really be pulled out of this layer of defense. So if you know what a valid login looks like for your website, you would instrument that, or what an invalid one looks like. You could also specify what the password reset looks like, and then also what a valid auth session also looks like. So when someone's doing cross-site scripting and they're also auth into your application, like that's a lot more interesting, depending on a multi-factor of things. But that's a lot more interesting than just some random scanner on the internet and just hitting you with random cross-site scripting. So and we have visualization and alerting, and we hook into all sorts of integrations that are in the kind of the chat ops, DevOps type tool chains from PagerDuty and Slack and HipChat and all those things. So,
but it's not just security information. Like, what are some of the operational benefits of just monitoring your application with Signal Sciences? It extends beyond security, right?
Yeah. We have some people that put us on there and they say, oh, like we didn't realize like this page was like generating a bunch of errors, or we're able to kind of help see that. I mean, we're primarily looking for mostly security type events, but we look across the whole gamut of that.
Yeah, so I can see that visibility missing, right? Like, hey, when you go to this URL, you get all these errors, and sometimes the user doesn't even see those errors. They're just like generated in the background. and that's useful, right? That's maybe not security related, but also very useful, just good operations, right?
That's right. Yeah, and that's the part that we really try to focus on at Signal Sciences, where if you are getting attacked for, let's say, like SQL injection, like there's a certain amount of requests that happen in kind of that attack chain before you're actually breached. We're able to, and some of those will look like, HTTP 500 error codes just getting thrown. So those are like operational telemetry. Other ones will like, SQL type characters showing up in your logs, right? And then we would see that as well. And so when you put all that stuff together, we say, yeah, with a pretty high degree of confidence, this person is kind of trying to gain access to your system using the kind of SQL injection as a vector there.
I liked operational telemetry.
Oh yeah, that's a good word, right?
It's a great phrase, and I also think it speaks to security as well. Because if you have that, inherently you have security, and you have good DevSecOps, right, Keith?
You have good DevOps, Paul. DevOps.
I love this DevSecOps. Well, and we often take our building telemetry and stuff like that for granted, but traditional application security said, we're going to write vulnerable applications, so therefore we need to train the developers not to write vulnerable applications. But you can't really teach people not to write bugs in their code. It's just a factor of being human. We write vulnerable code. So what we're really trying to do is add the kind of telemetry and instrumentation for your application that would give you insight into any kind of bugs that you would emit, whether security or otherwise. But Signal Sciences really focuses on that security use case.
So I know that Signal Sciences puts out a lot of interesting thought pieces on the DevOps and heaven forbid DevSecOps landscape. Is there anything more recently, James, that you've come out with that talks a little bit to kind of this problem state and maybe interesting metrics that people can go and check out?
We released last when was that? Last August, we had a paper we released on account takeover attempts. We really went through all of our data, trying to see what do account takeovers look like by vertical, types of error rates we see, how often. Like even in like retail, we found out like some of our customers, like one of their you would think like a 47% password reset rate. Oh, that's bad, right? Well, no, it's just like people forget their passwords all the time and they're always resetting them. Versus like other verticals like financial, like it was like a lot lower password reset rates. So I think that's a good report, and it's really interesting for just as one vector on like how to look at like application abuse and misuse kind of in the account type space.
Awesome. And do you have anything coming up that you guys are going to be doing in terms of, like webinars or discussions on this? Because I know that whenever I get an opportunity, I'm actually always like one of those guys creeping in your webinars, listening to interesting things that you guys are doing, because, admittedly, I'm a little bit of a fanboy. I'm, just throwing it out there for the Signal Sciences stuff. So anything that you guys have coming up?
We do have a webinar coming up on this topic of DevSecOps that I think is going to be real fun for us. There's the DevSecOps community survey results that just came out, and we're having Derek Weeks come and talk to us. That's going to be in mid-June, and so I think I can get you a link for that, and we can put that up. And we're also releasing the DevSecOps community survey results with that as well.
Awesome. I'm going to have a talk with Tyler Shields, though, about the whole DevSecOps moniker being thrown in there, but that's neither here nor there. He's a great guy over on the marketing team there at Signal Sciences. In fact, for those that are watching the video, he actually sent me this, which is a really cool, like connector dongle thing that I use all the time. So that was a huge kind of nice thing that he sent along to me. So we'll get him cleaned up on the DevSecOps thing, though. We'll have a conversation about that.
Hold on, I had a question. Oh, the survey, right? So what kind of things did you learn? What are some of the highlights that you took away from your survey?
Well, one of the things they said, 48% of developers. Now, out of this group, let's see, how much was it? 25. I wrote a couple of these down because I think they're interesting. It's 25% of the survey respondents said that they were mature in their DevOps practices, with another like 40 or so percent saying they're growing in their maturity. So these are very much like forward-thinking DevOps folks that are filling out the survey. Mm-hmm. But they said 48% of developers want to do security. They're just not really sure how. And I think sometimes security, we couch developers as like not interested in security, or they don't care about the security of their application. But I believe they really do. And I think the survey kind of bears that out. Other things we find that say that we saw that if you're wanting to instrument security, if you're kind of mature in your DevOps practices, you're 338% more likely to do that across the pipeline. And the survey is broken up with some metrics across each stage of the pipeline and different types of practices you could do. And you could see a really marked difference between people who don't have mature DevOps practices and those that do. And a lot of them are thinking through on how to implement further in this process.
Yeah, and I think Paul and I talked about that either last week or the week before, which is, take find a beachhead and then expand from there, right? Find the organization that's going to, or the team inside of your organization that's going to help you expand the growth of that model internally just by showing success, which it sounds like in this case in the study that those teams that found success were wildly successful in terms of bringing it to the rest of the organization, which is awesome.
Yep. Yeah, it's it's a self-selected survey. So, but I think that, we're seeing a lot of growth in that, and security is part of that DevOps story.
That's awesome. So let's just pause there and hopefully, we can continue to have further conversations on the DevOps v DevSecOps thing, maybe on the next time you get a chance to join us on the show, James. But in the interim, are you ready to play 5 questions with Application Security Weekly?
All right, I'm ready.
Awesome. So first, what were the specs like on your first computer?
Oh, my first computer, it was a 233 megahertz Pentium. No, that was my first real computer we had in the house. My grandfather always kind of passed down his really old computers to us, so we had kind of the what was a 20-pound box computer with kind of there was a portable computer at the time.
The handle on it?
That I was able to actually use and didn't feel embarrassed of. That was the first computer we had, is the 233.
That's awesome. So, what programming language did you learn first, and what are you enjoying writing in today? If you're still doing any kind of hands-on the keyboard coding.
Yeah, let's see. What I can't remember what I learned first, in school, but I took some C and some Java kind of in college, and those are some of my first more fuller language. Right now, I'm using a lot of Golang. Signal Sciences is 100% Golang, and I still have some projects in that. I do have a vulnerable serverless application that I just wrote in Golang, I guess about 6 months ago, and it's called LambHack. So if you're interested in that, it's kind of fun.
I will be sure to cover it on the next learning and tools that we do if it's open source.
Right,
so
yeah, it is.
Let me also go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, it is open source. Yep.
Oh, perfect. Okay, awesome. Then in that case, we will definitely get a link to it in the next time we do learning and tools on the show. Of course, I have to ask the age-old question though: Vim or Emacs?
I don't really know how this is a question. I mean, it's definitely got to be Vim.
Had me worried there for a moment.
Who could
So for those Emacs
Emacs
listeners out there, this is a Vim house. So then I guess it sounds like you're writing a lot in Go. Is that kind of one of the first languages you would recommend people learn today, or are there other languages that you would kind of have people queue up as something to learn if they're looking to get into a little bit of development?
Yeah, I really like Go. I mean, Go is the language. What's the popular saying about it? Go is the language. This is the next version of C, not brought to you by the guys who brought you C++.
Yeah.
And so I like Go. I think it's great. So,
I haven't done anything with it yet myself, but it keeps being that language that, other than JavaScript, which I'm a little bit obsessed with right now, I very well may pick it up, especially because I like C, I like C++. I like C better than C++, and I also like Python, and I've heard it's kind of a good mix of C and Python. So I don't know, is that a kind of a fair assessment of the language?
I'd say that's pretty fair. I enjoyed it. It's nice, the operational model too. A lot of people doing DevOps tooling and building tools for that are building it in Go, and part of that's just the way it couples in all the binaries and does vendoring that way, and the deployment, and it compiles direct. So I think that's, having come from most recently from Go. I was in Ruby a lot, and it's just night and day difference. Really enjoy Go from that standpoint.
Yeah, Keith, you should just go. You should just go with it. It's my bad dad joke for this show.
Well, I just might, Paul. Last question for you, James. Who would you nominate as someone we should interview as on a future episode of Application Security Weekly?
Okay, well, I think this DevSecOps thing is really taken off. So I think you got to bring Shannon Leitz on. Shannon Leitz, she runs the DevSecOps Twitter account and DevSecOps.org, I think, and she has done an amazing job of putting security inside of DevOps over into it. Really big fan of Shannon and her stuff, so I think she'd be great on the show.
Awesome, we'd love to have her. With that, we are going to take a short break and come back for the news.